Hello, and welcome to this Digital Twin Summit session, Getting Your Digital Twin Implementation Unstuck and Ready to Scale. I'm Irene Petrick. I'm Senior Director of Industrial Innovation at Intel Corporation. I spent the majority of my time looking at the industrial space from the manufacturing point of view, trying to understand the problem space, the pain points, and then trying to figure out what those pain points mean for the technology companies and vendors developing solutions for this space. Today, I'm joined by three very senior and very experienced leaders in this area. I'm joined by Shrimurthy, who is the Senior Vice President for Digital Transformation Strategy at Vertex Solutions, who is also one of the sponsors of this summit. Stephen Ballar, Dr. Stephen Ballar, CEO at Advanced Manufacturing International, and Mark Halpern, who's the VP and analyst at Gartner. These three leaders really bring to us not just practical experience and strategic experience, but they bring to us a wealth of knowledge about how this all transforms within using digital twins to do digital transformation. So today we're going to begin with the assumption that you in the audience have already tried something. And you already think there's some value around using digital twins to represent parts of your operations. However, we're going to assume also, given the title of this presentation, that some of you are struggling with how to go from pilot purgatory to scale and how to achieve maximum value from your digital twin efforts. So instead of beginning with our esteemed colleagues talking about what is a digital twin and why would we use it, we're actually going to focus on how to restart projects and how to capture or maybe recapture some of the value of digital twins in your operations. In this section, we expect to spend about 35 minutes of our 45 minutes in directed discussion. I'll throw out a few questions and our colleagues will answer to the best of their experience. And as you're listening to this discussion, please feel free to place your questions in the chat window or to hold those questions to the Q&A at the end of this session. So rather than me introducing our participants, let me ask each one of them to briefly describe their experience with digital twins and to talk about their company and where they are. So Shree, let's begin with you.
So thank you so much for having me, and I think this is a wonderful group of individuals that have done brilliant things around the digital twin. So I'm honored to be part of this session. Thank you. So my name is Shrimurthy. I'm the SVP for Digital Transformation Strategy at Vertex Software. We are fundamentally a 3D product visualization company. So we deal with making sure that we can take 3D CAD data and represent it in a much better way for engineering and manufacturing and really the entire value stream, right? A lot of times people have wondered as to why we need to do digital twin or what the advantages are, whether it's hype or not, and so on and so forth. And I'll leave most of that for the later part of the discussion. But the one thing that has become very exciting now with the advent of cloud is that engineering applications, softwares, including our zone, has come of age in terms of making sure that we get maximum value for the buck from implementing these technologies. So we can talk a little bit about that. My background really is manufacturing. So people say that a software engineer cannot be from manufacturing or the other way around, but I have spent a whole lot of years in the plants, and subsequently I took on positions at Siemens PLM, starting with engineering animation through Unigraphics, through EDS, and down to Siemens PLM. And so my background really from that perspective is product lifecycle management. And now over the years, over the last 27 odd years, I've been helping companies achieve their digital twin ambitions. And so I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shree. Hey, Stefan, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. And again, thanks for inviting me. Shree, it seems like we have a lot in common. We probably both worked for General Motors at some point when GM owned Unigraphics.
Yeah.
So I spent my first 15 years there in research and development, then became the chief scientist and senior technical director at GE Global Research, founding GE's brilliant factory initiative. And from there, I moved to IBM and led the product management of the AI applications and the IoT space. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Mark Halpern, and I am a research vice president at Gartner. I actually started the PLM practice at Gartner, and I cover engineering IT, besides product lifecycle management. I introduced model-based systems engineering to Gartner and building information management to Gartner. I actually started my career, I was one of the first 20 employees at ANSYS, developing nonlinear mechanics capabilities at ANSYS. I did a lot of work in supporting customers, etc. And then I decided I wanted to do real engineering, and I was at a company, Weidlinger Associates, where I was responsible for supporting missile development. I was in charge of a lot of the simulation activities there, of course, mostly using finite element analysis. And I have something in common with the last two participants. I was also an employee of SDRC, which then became ultimately a part of Siemens. And I was helping customers as a field engineer. Then finally, I was in a startup where we specialized in advisory services and consulting for engineering, design, and manufacturing, and then Gartner recruited me. I've been involved with digital twins for about the past 7 years. I helped Gartner lay the groundwork. I would dare say the groundwork of how Gartner researches them and perceives them. And I've had hundreds of interactions with clients over the past 7 years on what they struggle with on digital twins and advising them on them. And I just hope I'm giving good advice. So thank you for inviting me as well to participate in this session. I'm excited.
Great, thanks, Mark. So you can hear already the breadth of experience this set of three individuals brings to this summit and to this session. I think what I'm going to try and do is to focus a few questions on their direct experience, and then to ask them to share some of what they've learned in terms of lessons and what kind of advice they might give you to avoid some of the pitfalls you're experiencing. But before I get into those questions, Shree, I really want to ask you, your company, Vertex Solutions, is sponsoring part of this summit. Can you tell us why, a little bit more about what your company thinks that digital twins bring to companies and why you're excited about them?
Yeah, I'll actually turn this question a little bit around, Aryan, if I may. I want to give you a small story, right? Vertex software, I mean, what we do is 3D technology, right? And in fact, our founder, Dan Murray, we came from a company called Engineering Animation, where he was one of the inventors of the JT file format, which was used for 3D visualization almost 25, 30 years ago, right? And this JT technology was the one might call it as the PDF of CAD at that point in time. And that had been continuing on, right? As technology got more mature and people started using this a lot more, PLM systems became a lot more mature. And as such, the digital maturity of most companies started improving. Use of these technologies was going up, right? And as far as hardware technology is concerned, the cost was coming down. So everything was kind of working out all right. But what happened was everything that we want to do with the digital twin, right, was not really possible because of the sheer amount of processing power that is needed to visualize a lot of this data, right? And as we're coming into the IoT world of ours, there's more data flowing in, and so combining the digital representation of the physical asset along with this data was becoming much more and more difficult, right? Because of the processing power. So what Vertex did, what Dan Murray and his brilliant team of engineers did, was they created a similar visualization technology, but on a completely different scale, and primarily on the cloud. And that allowed us to actually democratize 3D data upstream and downstream of engineering. Most people will say that, okay, that 3D data is there, it's there with the PLM team, it's there with engineering, it's there with people who understand those tools and technologies. But what if people on the sales side or the marketing side want to use that? What if people downstream to maybe the dealerships, maybe the people on the shop floor want to use that? And that was not really as easy as one might think it should be, right? And so that's our, I guess, ticket to this very august table of experts. You're on mute.
Yep,
Irene.
I see that. Sorry, would you say you're democratizing the use of data and making it easier?
We call it 3D for everyone.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
And basically, you don't need to be an expert at 3D technology. You don't need to be an expert at software development all that much. All you need to say is, I want that 3D data for these applications, or for people in this field or that field, or this department or that department, and we make it happen. So while we can use a clever term as democratizing 3D, I call it 3D for everyone.
Okay, that'll work too, I suppose. So listen, you've got collectively a lot of experience about how to realize value about digital twins. Let me ask each of you to expand on some of that expertise over the last decade or more, depending on when you entered all of this. Mark, let's begin with you. When you and I originally talked about this session, you stressed that digital twins were not something that was conceptually new. Can you tell us more about what you're seeing about how the concept of digital twin has evolved, and what you're seeing today that might be driving adoption of digital twins?
Sure. Well, recently I'll start out talking about a survey that Gartner had done on adoption of Internet of Things. And we included questions in that survey about adoption of digital twins. About 400 companies participated, large representation from manufacturers and asset-intensive industries such as power generation, oil refining, chemical plants, minerals and ore processing, etc. So far, 18% of the participants in that survey, again, it was 400 companies, are actually operating with digital twins. A little under 80 companies, 72 to be correct, if my math is good. 51% are implementing now, and another 19% have been planning or discussing. They don't really have a schedule yet to implement, and the rest were not interested. But that's a healthy percentage of companies that the survey indicated. What's really driving more adoption is, I would say the bottom line, companies are looking for greater efficiency, greater profitability. One of the big surprises in adoption is how it's being adopted. Me being an engineer and oriented in that direction, I was first focused on the idea of monitoring products with long life cycles. Generally, the idea was companies were going to change their business models such that instead of buying products, you buy the value of the products. Whether you had a washing machine or a power generation company having a turbine, they weren't going to be buying products. They'd be leasing products that were monitored via IoT and supported with digital twins, such that as the products were repaired, upgraded, as they were being maintained, the records associated with the digital twins would be updated. But it turned out that so far, that is not the greatest adoption of digital twins. The greatest adoption of digital twins, at least in my venue, appears to be for operating factories, for monitoring the equipment in factories, monitoring overall manufacturing operations, to be able to proactively predict when there might be a problem with processes and equipment and intervene early to minimize downtime and also to avoid waste, where due to problems with equipment, goods being manufactured were being damaged. So those are the big drivers. And yeah.
So in your experience, Mark, then it really, digital twins are more driving internal operational excellence than they are driving business model changes right now.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in another survey we did, the CIO survey, that was clearly shown that manufacturing companies have been investing most on improving their internal operations. However, the interest is now turning to additional services and additional streams of revenue for customers. And that's an area of digital twins that is going to open up more and more.
Well, Mark, hold that thought, because I think I want to come back to that toward the end of this session, which is how is COVID and some of the changes we're seeing in operations maybe changing some of the ways that digital twins might be used in the future. So let's come back to that thought. Hey, Shree, there's a lot of hype around digital twins, and in your perspective, how does the hype that sort of Mark alluded to a little bit, but how does it get in the way of implementation? And what are some of the small and maybe large steps that companies should be thinking about to get these projects from pilots to scale? Shree, you're muted now.
We're just passing the baton.
That's right.
So right. When we look at this, I think it's an excellent question, right? The hype is what gets in front of all the executives. No matter who you take, I mean, everybody looks at what's actually coming by, and then they want to see how that can help their companies. And somebody would have told them that, okay, this is probably going to reduce your manufacturing costs by 13%. And they want to be there to achieve that. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people forget that it takes, it's akin to painting, right? It takes more time to prepare the room for painting than it takes to actually paint the house, right? So the preparation time for doing all these digital twin activities are far more, I guess, relevant and important to then realize the values of that hype. And unfortunately, everybody keeps looking at the hype and then get dissuaded as well, right? And we've heard about the Gartner hype cycle, and so everybody gets excited, and then you have a period of disillusionment that reduces the potential impact that these technologies can have. So while the hype is there, I think what's more important is for people to say, what is it that we are doing, okay, and how is it that we can reduce the cost for doing this, break it up into small little bite-sized chunks, and then start acting on those activities, right? Forget the hype. Let's say we want to implement IoT. Let's say we want to implement the digital twin for the product itself. Whatever it is, right? One by one, if you start to implement these things, I think everybody can realize that this is eminently possible. It's not just hype, it actually works. I'll give you an example, right? So way back in 99, when we first presented, I used to be part of this wonderful company called Engineering Animation, which eventually became part of Siemens PLM, right? At Engineering Animation, we had this product called Factory CAD for 3D factory modeling, and we demonstrated to the then CIO of General Motors, called Ralph Zagenda, on combining this 3D factory with inputs from discrete event simulation and combining it in such a way that you could actually see product being added in the 3D space. And this was way back in 1999. One of the things that Ralph told me at that time is, you're way ahead of this curve. If you introduce this technology too soon, it's going to bomb, right? So what you need to do is do it slowly and in bite-sized chunks, like we said. Fast forward a few years, and by 2004, General Motors had converted all their car and truck plants into 3D, incredible amount of fidelity into 3D. And they managed to do it with laser scanning, and then of course modeling the facilities and so on and so forth. So the message I want to leave you with in this particular for this particular question is that forget about the hype, break it up into tiny chunks, and go at it so that you're doing all the prep work so that you can ultimately realize the vision that you set out to achieve.
Hey, thanks, Shree. Stefan, your company, you've been involved in several companies that have been really deeply involved in digital twins. In your experience, not only what value do digital twins bring, but why is it so hard to develop sustainable projects? Why don't more projects get to scale?
Well, I think one key metric that we all have to think about is we should be more outcome driven. Digital twin in itself is useless. What is it going to do for me? What is it going to drive? More throughput, better quality, lower cost, lower engineering cost, not lower engineering time. Yeah, good. That will be fun. That will be really good. Everybody can sign up for that. But I think we have not paid enough attention to the business value digital twins can bring. And from my perspective, GE, being, I think, one of the drivers of digital twins starting in maybe 2013 or so, I was personally deeply involved with that. The reason that GE could use it was because we would design the product, we would engineer the product, we would produce the product, and we would service the product. Just like Mark talked about, its product as a service. And GE had been doing this for many years. And now the technology was ready to develop these digital twins so that you could get a closed loop of data, the so-called digital thread, from product engineering to manufacturing engineering to operations, monitoring the use, and then go to service, and then going back from service back to engineering to improve the product. So if you close that loop, you would be able to not only continuously improve the product, but also continuously improve operations, and basically have a data-driven approach that allowed you to improve throughput, quality, cost, and fulfillment on the manufacturing side, and at the same time improve quality and reduce engineering time on the product engineering side. And so once you have these outcome-driven digital twins, I think it's very clear that you succeed. The problem is if you just do digital twin because it's, you know, as Shree said, it's the hype of today, that's when you fail. And the other thing that you want to keep in mind is as you do it is your initial investments, because you have to build a platform of sorts, probably doesn't have a positive ROI. It's probably deeply red. So unless you have a system level strategy integrating all these processes and wanting to build more on the platform than just the first piece, you would probably better off not even starting.
Well, you raise a really interesting point there, Stefan, in terms of the linkage between a vision for what a digital twin can do and the investment in a longer term strategy. Let me open it up to all three of you and ask, what aspects of a company's vision should digital twin be driving? Stefan, you said outcome driven. What do the rest of you think? Mark or Shree, what do you think about that outcome-driven piece?
I agree. You know, when I was thinking about what are the challenges related to digital twins, and I get that question asked a lot by our clients. There's two things. Where do we start? And what should we be focused on? And what Shree said was also absolutely true. People tend to get excited and they make the scope way too large. So you really have to define the right scope, and you have to be outcome driven. If I could just take about 30 more seconds.
Sure.
I was asked that question by a pharmaceutical company once, and I asked them, well, you have to start small, but you want to start with something important. And what is the most critical piece of equipment in your factory? And they said the label printer. And if that label printer went down, manufacturing stops. So I recommended that they just first focus on that one piece of equipment, make your mistakes with that, your lessons learned, you get your lessons learned to start on continual improvements. And if you can build a digital twin for that, you've already delivered great value to the company if you've done it right. So that's clearly outcome driven. It was, I think, defining the right scope. I must confess, I don't know the status of it, but they embraced that advice when I gave it.
So let's build on a little bit of Mark, a little bit of what you just said, and Shree and Stefan, I'd love for you to comment. Mark was talking about a good example of a single application of a digital twin to a piece of equipment. How does that get tougher when you start talking about a piece of equipment in the context of a manufacturing line, or in the context of a factory, or heaven forbid, in the context of a supply chain? How do some of these system of systems issues impact, number one, how you think about digital twins, and number two, how difficult it is to scale them?
Yeah, I fully agree with Mark. Start small, start with something important, start now is what I would say. I would add the start now to that. When you build that first digital twin, let's say for that labeling machine, you have to keep in mind that if you want to have an overview, a digital twin of that factory or even the supply chain, you have to put in the infrastructure that will allow you to connect the data from that labeling machine to the machine that's before that. That's probably some quality control machine. You have to connect it to the machines and up front in the factory and so forth. So you have to have quite a substantial investment into I'll call it a platform that will allow you to integrate all that data. I very much remember we started this literally at General Motors, probably 2003 or 2004, and I thought, well, why don't we do some Excel things here, and we'll optimize that. Let's call it the labeling machine of General Motors. And one of the researchers who worked for me convinced me that we should really try to build a platform and just figure out how we could do that and then scale that across all the factories. And it was 10 times as expensive, 15 times as expensive. It was quite difficult to convince management that that was the right thing to do, because we could get the solution for the labeling machine much cheaper.
Right.
But in the end, we did that. And I will say, I was not completely convinced of that, but I tried it anyway. And the researcher was just 100% right, and it turned out to be one of the biggest success of my career, building that platform, integrating all the data from maintenance systems, from quality systems. We had IBM Maximo G Prophecy, we had Rockwell PLCs, we had a homegrown quality system that we integrated. So we had standards across all those factories. And having that platform and being able to demonstrate that we could integrate those data and then make system level decisions, trading off KPIs, key performance indicators with each other. So, throughput, quality, cost, on-time delivery, and predicting if you made this decision, this is what would happen. That really drove a lot of value, and we dramatically reduced maintenance cost. We improved throughput, improved quality. And the key there really was to, as Mark said, start small. We would typically start on a line, to have a little bit of system complexity, and then expand it to the factory. And then we would expand from one factory to the other 150 of General Motors. And again, the first factory was cash flow negative. And the only reason we could do this is because we had a research and development house that, that was challenged with innovation, and that's what we would do. The rollout then, of course, came through the IT systems. Ralph's Agenda's organization. I'm sure you mentioned it, and that was really the partnership that we needed to get from innovation to implementation. So,
can I make a comment, or should I hold off? Because
No, go ahead, because then I want to go to Shree and ask him about a systems of systems challenge. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I want to build upon what Stephen is saying, in that you need the skill sets to build the digital twin. But then what I maintain, and Stephen, I think you alluded to it, is some degree of systems thinking and systems engineering if you're going to build that platform for the factory. And another thing that I always say is you start small, but then model-based systems engineering, I submit, is the DNA of digital twins. And
I 100% agree. The only thing that you then need to do is you need to think about how do you scale this if you want to get into the supply chain from the multinationals to the small mediums, which is what the company that I lead now is dedicated to. How do you do digital transformation for the small mediums who don't have the technology and who don't have the skills readily available in their factories? So you have to do both. You have to do you have to go up the innovation for the multinationals, and you have to go down and simplify all that to integrate that within the supply chain.
Right. Yeah. So the point I think you would agree, starting small, I'll compare it to becoming a black belt in karate. You have to have the basic skills,
Yes.
And then when you get those basic skills, learning how to combine them in the right ways in order to build out your knowledge, experience, etc.
And you start with a white belt.
That's right.
That's right. You start by learning by doing. Hey, Shree, real quickly, from a systems of systems approach, where does leadership and culture come into this? How do we build an organization that's more ready to take these kinds of things on?
I think Stefan said this earlier, right? It's easy to do this when you have a very large organization and you have the R&D budgets, you have advanced manufacturing teams, right? I mean, teams of scientists and of thinkers who are actually devoting their skills and their time to actually making these kind of things possible. But in most of the other cases, right, in a whole lot of other companies that are not as large or don't have that much of, deep pockets, right, it becomes exceedingly hard to start saying, okay, let us, take on a research project and then build it, and then over the next several years we're going to do something. It becomes really, really hard, right? So what we've got to do, again, going back to the basic principles, start small, right? Get an ROI. Try to get an ROI for that one little thing. Nothing succeeds like success, right? That's one thing that I've learned over the years, right? So make that one little project successful. And if it's possible to do it with existing funds and existing capabilities and existing people, that's fantastic. If not, that's when it becomes exceedingly important to make sure that we bring in senior management, especially the chief executive down. Everybody should be bought into this thing that we are going to do this so that we all advance forward as an organization, right? What happens is, if this is a pet project of somebody, right, that person does this little project and then they go away, right? Or if somebody picks up or is given a project and then it's a part-time job, meaning I am heading up engineering or I am heading up manufacturing, and I also take up this, I'll just say PLM for the moment, but PLM or MES or whatever projects or IoT projects. If I'm devoting only part of my time to it, it's not going to get anywhere, right? The one thing that I think I'll also talk to you guys about is, I attended this Gartner session in India several years ago, where Tina Nuno presented on how to present to the board and how to present to executive management, right? If I put on my scientist cap and I talked about stochastic analysis of data and this and that and the other thing, and then go to them with these complicated but very compelling slides, they're not going to get it. They want to know how this particular project affects their bottom line, right? And if you're walking into a boardroom, for example, don't present a brand new idea into the boardroom at the first shot, right? You've got to figure out who your audience is, and outside of this meeting, go to them and tell them that this is the idea that I'm pursuing. What do you think? Get their inputs, so that by the time you come to the boardroom, everybody has a general idea of where we're going with this, right? So you've got to use those techniques, and it's very, very important to make sure that the leadership is bought in, that these projects become an agenda item during the reviews, right? So they come to the meeting room and say, okay, how are we doing with this particular project or that particular project? Then what happens is, even if let's say Shree, who was leading up this project, succeeds in this project, gets promoted or wins a lottery and goes away, that particular project or the ethos of the project remains a part of the DNA of that particular organization, and somebody else takes on, and it goes on and on and on.
So Shree, you're sort of leading into my last question, and I'm gonna paraphrase what you just said in a sense, which is, understand who you're talking to, understand the message you need to deliver, and deliver it in snippets that can be understood over time. Right. So Stefan and Mark, in one sentence, because we're here backing up against the Q&A part, and I want to leave time, in one sentence, what would you advise people who are struggling? How would they unstick a project? One sentence or maybe two.
define the outcome and the value you're creating, and get the top guy to buy in, or the top
Okay,
girl.
so similar to what Shree had to say in terms of buy-in and messaging.
Yep.
Okay, Mark, how about you?
I don't think I could say anything in one sentence.
Oh, come on, I threw a challenge to you. I'll give you two.
Okay. I would say you need to do a root cause analysis, because there are many dimensions of digital twins that can fail across communications, across data governance, and across the scope of the initiative. That
Okay,
was
Mark,
one
that was
sentence, albeit a
really
very
long
long sentence.
Well,
all right.
Irene, if I can add
Very briefly, because I want to leave time for questions. Go ahead.
Indeed. So no matter what you want to do, right, you want to make sure that you take the entire organization along. And a very strong communication strategy and internal communication strategy is very important. I tell people, whatever your project is, get everybody to buy in. Talk about it so much that people get excited, raise their hand and say, I want to be part of that particular project. Give that project a name, right? Call it whatever. I mean, whatever, brings in a little bit of, attention to that particular project, and people want to be part of that story.
All right, so there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. The bottom line is, how do we get unstuck? We understand the value we add. We understand how to tell the story, when to tell the story, and we understand how to deliver it in chunks over time. We do have time for questions, and I encourage you to either ask questions directly or to place them in the chat window. Thank you.